to the Scrutiny Programme Committee. We're looking today at homelessness and poverty, so the very important subjects. I'll start off the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence. I've had apologies from Councillor Hannah Lawson and from co-opted members Councillor Chris Holly, Councillor Sue Jones and Beth Allender. Does anybody know of any other apologies? No? Okay, thank you. Any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest? No? Most members are online, I noticed. Before we go on, actually, just as people, most members are online, just go through and say who's in the room here so people are aware who's in. So I'm here, Councillor Peter Black, the chair, and go to you, Bridge, next.
Good afternoon, Bridge Meadow from Scrutiny team leader.
Peter May, Uplands Ward councillor.
Councillor Francesca O'Brien.
Councillor Rebecca Fogarty, West Cross.
Anthony Richards, Tackling Poverty Service.
Lee Cambouli, Tackling Poverty Service.
Amy Hawkins, Head of Adult Services and Tackling Poverty.
Good afternoon, Samantha Woon, Democratic Services Officer.
Debbie Smith, Legal Advisor.
Okay. Thank you for that. Just so members online know who's in the room. Right, so no disclosure of personal prejudice, just double check that. No? Okay. Any prohibition, whip votes and declaration of party whips? No? Okay. In that case, we move on to the minutes. The minutes of the 15th of November relating to our scrutiny of fly tipping, the corporate safeguarding annual report and the follow-up on the scrutiny working group on workforce. So I just go through for accuracy, starting with page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, minutes as a whole. Is everyone happy with that? They're accurate? What's that about Matthew Jones? Okay, Matthew, sorry.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. I'm having camera problems here. I just, during that meeting, I asked the head of service about the delegated, how many officers are delegated powers to deal with dog fouling, and I still haven't had an answer, to be honest. Now, I appreciate he said, he was doing a paper on fly tipping, but if he didn't want the question on dog fouling, he shouldn't really have included that part of it in the paper.
Yeah, what we'll include that in the letter. We haven't actually done the letter yet, Matthew. So we'll write the letter to the cabinet member, and it will be included in that, and we'll ask them for a response in writing to that particular thing. Is that okay?
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Cheers.
Great, lovely. Okay, public question time. There's no written questions received, so we're going to move on to the cabinet member portfolio responsibilities on homelessness. Can I welcome Councillor Andrea Lewis? Carol Morgan, I think, is here. Steve Porter, I think, is here, and Sarah Jordan, I've seen her all online. We've all read the paper which you've submitted. Andrew, do you want to do a quick introduction before we go into questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you again for the committee's interest in what is clearly a critically important topic for us as a local authority. You will see, and Steve will take us through the report, that homelessness is on the increase. The homelessness presentations have actually increased across Wales. So this isn't Swansea specific. This is something that we are seeing across the board. I'm proud to say that in Swansea, we are continuing our Always a Bed pledge. And we have, as Steve will outline, some incredible achievements, I feel, particularly over the last few years in terms of some much needed emergency and temporary accommodation provision, some excellent facilities, which I'm sure Steve will touch upon in more detail. But I wanted also to take the opportunity to place on record my thanks to all the teams, not just in-house, but obviously our external partners as well. They are working and have worked throughout the pandemic and continue to work flat out to try and help support people at their greatest time of need. And so, you know, I pay tribute to them. They're doing a fantastic job. And I hope that the committee will come to the same conclusion once we go through the scrutiny process this afternoon. With that, Chair, we'll be brief. I'll hand over to Steve to take us through.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I think all the committee would certainly reflect your thanks. all the council staff have been under a huge amount of pressure during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, and I think they've all managed to do a fantastic job under those circumstances. Steve, we have read the report. Do you want to add things to it, or just highlight particular issues?
Just to quickly run through it, Peter, if that's okay. I'll probably be 5 minutes. I'll try and keep it down to 5 minutes. Is that all right?
Okay, fine.
And just to talk about the data and the current trends and how we're tackling homelessness, and then look at some of the challenges going forward. Hopefully that'll cover some of the questions that might occur. I'm sure people are really interested in some of the stuff we're doing. And you'll see from the news this weekend about the housing crisis. So it's not just, as Andrew said, a local issue. This is a regional issue, a national issue, and a UK-wide issue. In terms of Swansea, we are seeing the highest number of homeless presentations that we've ever had, quite honestly. We're seeing a trend in the last 2 years. I wouldn't say a worrying trend, but it's going up and up. And we're approaching about 4,000 homeless presentations if by the end of this financial year, if we carry on in the same vein. But the demand for social housing is also increasing, and this is really important to understand this, that all the tenants that we support, they're looking, some of them are looking to transfer, so those numbers are increasing. So people who perhaps waited patiently in the pandemic are now looking to move on, and they're finding that hard because lots of other people wanted to move, and therefore the pressure is just increasing from everywhere. So you'll probably see that in a number of disgruntled tenants that we've had recently, that they think they need to move, but there's not a lot of property to move into. Preventing homelessness is difficult. The causes of homelessness around relationship breakdowns from partners, from family, and private rented landlords giving notice to quits. These sort of causes of homelessness are difficult to prevent. And these are all linked, I guess. So the number of households in temporary accommodation is increasing. We're over 200 people, households in temporary accommodation at the moment. 75% of those are single households, 25% of those roughly are families. But that's higher than we've seen it. Not as high as other authorities. Some other authorities are having a waiting list for temporary accommodation. We're not quite there yet, but it is a struggle. And people are spending longer in temporary accommodation. And that's primarily, down to the lack of move-on options. And that's particularly in the private rented sector. And we can talk about that perhaps shortly. But we're seeing more landlords leaving the market, and the ones that are there, the rents are incredibly high. So those people on low income or no income or on benefits are really finding it hard to get accommodation in the private rented sector, and therefore turning to the local authority for social housing, for affordable housing. There are, of course, external factors such as cost of living. I'm sure Anthony and Lee will talk about that later on. And other pressures such as Ukraine crisis, etc., which are adding all to quite a difficult environment at the moment. The greatest demand, though, is for one beds. How we're tackling this is through the Housing Support Programme strategy. This is a 4-year strategy, 22 to 26, so it was implemented in April. And that's in conjunction with our supporting people colleagues and social services, but also through service user consultation and through consultation for you guys and through our partners in the voluntary sector. So not a strategy that's come up from nothing. This is from the data and from consultation. And out of that have come 9 priorities. I'm not going to regurgitate these priorities, but there's definitely a focus on increasing the level of one beds, increasing the level of social housing stock that we need to get. But that isn't simply about building new properties. So don't say we have to build properties. There are other ways to do that. Develop into the private rented sector, make better use of our own stock, turning empty homes around, and so on. It is partly about building new properties, but we just need to increase the level of affordable housing that we've got in the sector at the moment. Other priorities will include young persons, domestic abuse, and so on. But one of the key priorities is about rapid rehousing. The Welsh Government are very focused on this. They're looking at a 10-year plan for this, and that's providing wraparound support to people at the right time, making sure they move on quickly through the system and providing intensive support. So that is something that we are keen on, and it's definitely something the Welsh Government are keen on. In terms of successes, it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all challenges and pressures. We have housed over 1,100 people through temporary accommodation to more settled accommodation since the start of the pandemic. So that's a huge amount of people if you think about it, a huge amount of households. And so the people who are in temporary accommodation now are not the people that were 6 months ago and 12 months ago. There's constant work going on from social services and housing to stop people becoming homeless and to move people on. The More Homes programme has been quite, robust in how they've acquired new properties, built new properties, turning around voids quicker. So, we've used a lot of funding in that area, and we've got some statistics on that. If we can provide them at a later date, Peter. We've reduced evictions at a huge level. We're down to almost 0 evictions. That was in part down to the pandemic, but also through a different approach by the rent arrears team, a psychologically informed approach, not just writing out to people and saying, look, you've got rent arrears, please pay us. It's about going out to see them, talking to them, helping them with funding if we can. So huge successes. Bryn House, we've developed new temporary accommodation and permanent accommodation. Bryn House has recently won an award. So along the way, there's been huge successes, and we've used a lot of the housing support program strategy to create increased housing first initiative that we've got, which has been really sort of successful. So we've strengthened resources in there. We've increased units in T-Tom Jones. So lots of successes on the way, and I won't bore you with that. It's all in the strategy. Summing up in terms of challenges going forward. Demand is simply outstripping supply, and we've got to find a way to stop that demand coming into the service. We can build as many properties as we like, but we can't keep up with the demand that's coming in at the moment. So we have to find a way to prevent homelessness. And you can do that. Appreciate there are external factors affecting us, the cost of living, etc. But there are ways to prevent homelessness. The cost of living crisis is of major concern to us. We're starting to see people approach us through unaffordability levels. Do they pay their bills? Do they pay their rent, etc.? We're starting to see that more and more. We are seeing legislative changes from the Welsh Government. So getting rid of priority need is a focus for them. They haven't quite done that yet. So we're having to place more people into temporary accommodation. So we've got one eye on the legislation changes. And just finishing off, staff pressures is high. As Andrew mentioned, we've worked so hard during this period. We're continuing to work hard, but it is catching up. And it is catching up. It's difficult, so we need to make sure that we consider the resources in the right place. Partnership working is clear throughout the whole of this. If we don't have partnership working, we can't prevent homelessness. Thankfully, in Swansea, we are fairly strong in this area with our voluntary sector partners, with crisis, social services, agencies, etc. We're not there yet. We haven't got partnership cracked, but I think we're heading in the right direction there. But without the partnership working, we're not going to meet those challenges. Pete, I'm sure there's loads of questions, so I'll shut up now.
Thanks for that, Steve. That's a very helpful summary of what's in the report. I'll start off, if that's okay. The last homelessness strategy, which we had in front of us for the 2018 to 2022, can you confirm that its success is now part of the housing support programme strategy? What period it covers, and does that mean, and have there been any revision to previously stated homelessness priorities in the new strategy, or refocusing in light of the experience over the last year or so? So that's a big mouthful of a question.
Okay, but yeah, it's a lot of questions there, Pete, but it's quite clear what you're asking. The strategy was something the Welsh Government were keen for to bring social services and housing together, quite rightly so, about supporting people.
Yeah. So
that has now amalgamated into one strategy from 2022 to 26. So it's a 4-year strategy starting from April. So we've revised, updated our action plan to merge with that. Lots of the priorities, lots of the objectives are similar to what we had in 2018. However, there's much greater focus on rapid rehousing and increasing the level of properties. I talked about the need to build more homes and develop more ideas about how we can convert. So there's a bit more of a focus around rapid rehousing and creating more properties in the new housing homeless action plan. But that action plan is attached to the strategy, which I think is there in the appendix.
Okay, just you mentioned earlier on the Welsh Government's ambition to do away with priorities in terms of homelessness. Is that going to have a big impact on the council? Are we going to find more people going to temporary accommodation as a result of that, or do you think fewer?
Oh yeah. So what happened was at the start of the pandemic, they sort of put a hold on priority need, so everybody was in priority need. They've now moved back to where it was. However, they've increased the number of priority categories to include those at threat of rough sleeping. So they're edging towards that point of, everybody in priority. Yes, it's going to have a huge impact, Peter. We've already seen that in temporary accommodation levels, but it's going to, for us, we had the everybody in approach before that, and we want to try and continue that. So that's why we're high at the moment with temporary accommodation. Hopefully, we're kind of peaking now, and we can make inroads into that with the TACP funding and new properties coming online. I can't guarantee that because of external factors, but we don't think it's going to be greatly increased if they did get rid of priority need next week.
Okay. I think another question before I let someone else in. In the last homelessness strategy, there are a large number of areas for development, and I've just pulled out a few of them. Simplifying access to refuge accommodation, providing temporary support accommodation for households experiencing domestic abuse was one of them. Better working with the RSL sector, and also improving outcomes for households with complex needs, including mental health and learning disabilities. What sort of progress have you managed to make with those issues since that strategy was drawn up in 2018?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit has changed since then. So numbers have determined how we deal with it. So at the moment, it's very difficult to get somebody into a refuge anyway. So it's one in, one out, if you like, at the moment. So that's kind of been superseded. We have had funding. We've developed more temporary accommodation to support people with domestic abuse. We've had funding in the past 12 months to create a safe house, whereby those people who don't quite fit into a refuge can be supported. So perhaps those with older children, or perhaps male victims of domestic abuse, where we haven't got that much provision. So we've created that in the past 12 months. In terms of the RSL question, I have to sing their praises a little bit. Since the pandemic, they've been really supportive with us. They flex their nominations to say, right, how many one beds do you want? We want all of them if we can. Okay, use 100% nominations. Recently, we had too many families, in temporary accommodation. They gave us more family properties. They helped with the T. Tom Jones project with Pobble. They've developed more properties for the TACP funding. I have to say the RSLs have stepped up to the mark in the past couple of years. Again, there's still work to do. We've still always got to develop some relationships there, but I couldn't criticize them in any way in the last couple of years. I think there was another strand of that, Peter, was about complex needs.
Yeah, mental health in particular, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough area. Dual diagnosis, particularly substance misuse and mental health, is really problematic to us. But that's why we increase provision in housing first, increase resources there. That is to sort of accommodate the people with the most need in the city, the most vulnerable. So we've increased resources there. We've increased units to T. Tom Jones. So there are ways that we've tackled that. Again, I think we've still got to work with mental health to try and make sure that those suffering with dual diagnosis are supported. That's not an easy area to crack, and that's again not a local issue.
Okay, thanks. Francesca, you had a question about homelessness presentations.
Thanks, Chair. And thank you, Steve, for the report as well. Although it's a very sad report, it was actually very interesting to read what exactly is going on and the work carried out by the council. So thank you for that. But reading the report on, to be specific, the paragraph 2.2, it showed the graph, and over the years, it is evident that homelessness has increased, sadly. I was just wondering, is it a true comparison from, say, now to compared to 10 years ago? Have we got more people living in the city? Is it because maybe people are living longer, that maybe towards their elderly years? Are they needing that support? Are they finding themselves in that difficult position? Is it sort of like for like, have numbers increased? Or I was just wondering to see if there was any more details on that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question, but if you look at the graph, the 8 years prior to the pandemic, the figures were fairly similar. You know, 3,500 applications. What our worrying trend is that since the pandemic, is that, you know, it's going up and up, and we can't seem to stem that. So that's our biggest worry is since the pandemic. In terms of the population growth, I may have my figures wrong here, but going on the census information, there's not been a huge increase in population growth. So I would say that based on that, we are concerned about the number of presentations. But I haven't got the exact detail of, people are living longer, so we do have, and the one thing about that I think is we have to create more properties which are suitable for people who need adapted properties, which again is of concern to us going forward.
Yeah, thank you, thanks.
Okay, I've got Wendy Fitzgerald online. Wendy.
Sorry, Chair, could I add to that, if that's okay?
Oh yeah, sorry, Andrea. Yeah, carry on first. Then.
Yeah, I think, in that question, in terms of what is causing an increase in homelessness presentations, we have to acknowledge, we will see an increase in terms of the cost of living crisis and the financial pressures that people are under, and we are seeing that as a factor. And we can't ignore the fact that those financial pressures are also going to be linked to domestic abuse and breakdown in relationships as well, because there's nothing worse than money worries. And so we think that we won't see a decrease in these presentations anytime soon. As Steve has said, we can try and focus on early intervention and prevention, but we aren't anticipating that these numbers are going to go down anytime soon because the pressures are only getting more extreme.
Thanks, Andrew. There was a think tank report in the Guardian this morning saying that they expect that nearly 50% of the population will be below the minimum income needed to sort of survive by 2024, which is exceedingly depressing and certainly going to have an impact on our services. Okay, Wendy Fitzgerald, sorry. You're muted, Wendy. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I unmuted, but it seems to mute itself these days. A couple of queries about paragraph 2.8, which is on the rough sleeping data. What made me curious was that it says that a number of people currently sleeping rough have a tenancy they could return to. Could you elaborate on that, which it seems slightly odd to me? And also, it says that in recent years, a relatively high number of those sleeping rough come from outside the area. Again, why is this happening? And I think it was mentioned that we have always a bed as a pledge. Does this have any draw? I'm just curious. So if you can provide an answer, jolly good.
Anybody?
Yeah, they're really good questions, actually, Wendy. So if I take you back to the pre-pandemic, we had fairly high numbers in Swansea, 20 to 25 per night out sleeping rough any one night. When the pandemic hit, one night we were down to 0, a couple of nights actually. That has slowly crept up, and we're getting to a point where we've got about 8. We're averaging about 9 rough sleepers per night at the moment. So we're in a better position to what we were. Specifically, if we take last night, for example, a very live example, we've got we had 7-8 people sleeping rough last night, and you think how cold it was. 3 of which decided to sleep rough when they wanted to be with 1 or 2 of their friends out, even though they had a tenancy. So they decided that they wanted this to stay out last night, and we've obviously tried to support them back into their tenancy, but sometimes that's more difficult. So people are choosing is a difficult thing to say, Wendy, to be fair, because it's not a choice. That's what they're deciding to do. They do, so not everybody, but a lot of them have tendencies to go back to. In terms of the area, we can't stop that. We are a city. Swansea's brilliant, of course, so people will come here. They're not coming here because of everybody a pledge, Wendy. What we try and do initially is reconnect people to to their place. So we wouldn't immediately say, right, here's a place, here's a brilliant house. You know, we'll try and support them. If people are here and we can see they're going to stay here, then we look to see what we can do here. So it's just the fact that we're a city. Cardiff are having double, treble the problems we're having. Wrexham the similar level. So I think the draw is resources. You know that it's just the way it is, really. I think there was another question there, but I'm not sure I've answered it.
No, I think you have. Thank you very much. Whether it's the answers I wanted is another question.
I think Wendy, a lot of people sleeping rough have very chaotic lives. So although they may have accommodation, they want to go. They
Yes.
sometimes can't cope with actually staying in that accommodation, and they have to work with them to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I think we've got Mike White next. Mike.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, more or less following on from 2.8 there with rough sleepers, looking at the graph, Steve. Just wanted to know, in regards to the rough sleepers, where does Swansea compare with the numbers in compared to the other 21 authorities? Are we able to, if you obviously haven't got it to hand, I'm more than happy to have a written response.
I should have it to hand, Mike, but I haven't. But we'll make a note of that. I think we'll always be fairly, the cities will always, obviously, compared to the rural authorities, we're going to always see more rough sleeping. But I think comparatively we're pretty good. But I just know that anecdotally, that's by and large down to a rough sleeping team at work 7 days a week. Go out every day, and yourself, Mike. We go out, people you reported to us the following day. So we're quite proactive in engaging with people. We're not always successful because of what we just talked about. But I think I'll have to come back to the exact figures. But I think we're quite favourable for the size of city that we are in terms of the number of sleepers that we have.
Thanks, Steve. That's okay. Great.
I guess, Steve, it depends as well on the facilities available in each of those urban centres as well, in terms of how the impact on rough sleeping. Yeah, Lyndon Jones. Lyndon?
Great, thank you, Chair. Could I thank Steve as well and the team? I first came across Steve when I was on the poverty reduction PDC, and his passion and the passion for the team, for the work they do, is second to none. So, and I can see that has not changed. So really well done. You mentioned housing first, which I can remember we discussed at that time about 3 years ago, which obviously involves people who need extra help and support as a wraparound system. How many people do we have now on as part of that housing first scheme? How many people are being housed? Appreciate it's much more difficult because it's not just getting them a flat or a house. You've literally got to get the wraparound service, so it can't just happen. And I appreciate the difficulties. But that one first bit, and the second one is, I can remember Alison Pugh and I going into Swansea prison. They did let us out, although they were thinking about me, I think, but they let us out. But basically it was at that point when people were being released from prison, they were literally not homeless until they left, and that was an issue. And has that position now improved? Because that was they were simply going down the road, smashing a window or something to get back in, and that wasn't good in any level. Thank you.
Okay, in terms of housing first, we were one of the leading authorities in Wales to develop quite a large scale project. Large scale in this context means initially 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it was for 20 units. And what Housing First is to tackle those people in the city with the most complex needs, long-term rough sleepers effectively. So, and it's quite expensive, it's not cheap to run, it's quite a high intensive support. So we started off with 20 units, and when we had the uplift in HSG, we've extended that down to 24. In actual fact, they support about 6 people at any one time. We've got to share the housing support grant out. As you know, there's young persons, older persons, mental health, and so on. We can't have it all for rough sleeping, but we have got a reasonable amount of that. So it's one of the largest scale housing first projects across Wales, actually. So roughly 24 units at the moment. And we every year we'll review that. Can we expand it? You know, it takes time to get the right people on board to do that, and it costs money. But I think at the moment it's about right. In terms of prison leavers, you know, we've got an ex-offender caseworker who works directly with the prisons. We're blessed with that. Not all authorities have that. We're working with Crisis. We're running a CTI project. You may have heard that. But that is working with the prison directly and trying to get people housed directly into housing. So we're working with Crisis on that, and we're working with a potential project now on that. And there's a bespoke supported housing project called Gorwellian who take people from prison directly into their supported housing project, and they actually go in and do I think it's called a 9-step program in the prison as well. There's lots going on. You know, the one caveat to that, of course, is it's very difficult to house people permanently at the moment. Every person, you know, not just prisoners. So that's the one challenge for us, is trying to get people from prison to permanent housing. But there's lots in between that we can support people. So hopefully we'll reduce reoffending that way.
Great, thank you very much, Steve.
Yeah, I had a question on prisons later on anyway, so I might as well ask it now, Steve. I know that the Welsh Government actually took away the priority for people leaving prison, which is something I wasn't particularly happy about, because, of course, if you don't get rehoused when you come out of prison, you're more likely to reoffend, and the statistics are quite clear on that. They did put in place a number of different schemes to try to compensate for that. Is that working, do you think, or do you think the priority would be better off restored, or are we getting by without it?
I think the problem was, Peter, back then, is that there was a total reliance on housing, that, oh, it's okay, they're coming out of prison, we don't have to do any work in the prison because they're a priority need. And there was a big gap. And so there was a need to change it. The pandemic has changed everything anyway, because everybody's been in, and we were actually housing people before that anyway. And now with this rough sleeping added onto the priority categories, it pretty much covers it. Not all prisoners will be priority, but a large percentage of them will be. So I think we're okay. What I'm worried about is the fact that people will then rely on housing again as the answer, and it's not the answer. You know, just providing a roof is not. We need to provide the support. We need to provide the tools for people to move on, and so, you know, hopefully we've learned from 2001, and we're in a better place now. So most prisoners now, well, all prisoners at the moment are in temporary accommodation, and we will carry on that for the foreseeable future.
Thank you for that, Peter May.
I am Steve. Reading this paper brings back memories of my stint as housing cabinet member from 2008 to 2012. With all these terms, brings the whole experience flooding back to me. 4.5. I know you haven't got you said you're going to provide more detailed figures. Would it be possible to provide any sort of headline figures of how many voids we've actually got at the moment in your authority, and sort of roughly, I can see 34 are coming back into use. Are you going to try and convert some of them due to the identified need that there are single presentations for homelessness? You know, they are seem to be the problem area at the moment, or the highest area of demand. The other thing that I seem to remember was something called a mortgage rescue scheme. Now, obviously, with the cost of living crisis now, this is something that might be, or some sort of a similar scheme might be taken advantage of or needed in the future. I was looking, just a cursory glance on the website now. I was looking, Caerphilly have one operating. I remember when we used to meet with other housing cabinet members, it was mooted at the time I was in post, I think around about the 2009 time this scheme came in. So do we operate something or something similar? I don't know, Welsh Government might be something they bring in, or have we got something that can help people should the cost of living crisis start to bite, and people will be sort of unfortunately prevented from paying their mortgages when the fixed rate deals come to an end, inevitably. you know, is this something that you know, we've got on the back burner to prevent further homelessness? Thank you.
Yeah, I think Andrea wants to come in first. Andrea.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You know, just to come in on the first point really about bringing voids back into use. It states quite clearly in the report we are focusing our efforts on trying to reduce the number of voids that we have. We're also investing heavily in acquisitions and buying back ex-council right to buy properties and bringing those back into stock and focusing that on single bedroom accommodation, ground floor accessible flats, you know, for example, because we know the demand is there and we're trying to meet that need. In terms of mortgages, I'm sure Carol can come in with more detail about what we do in Swansea, but I know that this is something that has come up in a recent meeting with the Minister, Julie James. She's looking at councils returning to that mortgage support. And so I'm sure Carol will be able to give a bit more detail on that.
Carol?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the mortgage rescue scheme is still alive. We haven't had many applications recently. We used to operate the scheme via the RSL, our RSL partners. So we can look at perhaps doing a bit more work with the RSLs around that scheme. But also, as you'll be aware, local authorities are now eligible for social housing grant as well. So that's something we can look at working with. And as Andrew said, we have done a number of acquisitions, buying back properties, and there may be opportunities to consider buying back properties and creating tenancies where there's a necessity for people to do that. So that's something we can certainly look at again, and maybe increasing the visibility of that scheme.
Okay, Peter. If I may, can I just riff a bit on this issue about new properties? Because it seems to me we're building new properties to very high environmental standards. So just as a thought, would we be able to build more properties if we lowered the environmental standards of them? Could we look again at the prefab initiative we had in the 1990s? There's still some of those around in my ward as well as in Cockett ward. And in terms of private sector empty homes, we still got thousands of those. And so could we do with more powers to try to acquire those for council properties? Is there more that we could do if we had the powers and the resources? And should we be lobbying Welsh Government on those sort of issues? Anybody? Andrea, Carol?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in there. I think the answer is yes to them all. And yes, we are lobbying Welsh Government on all those things. In terms of the environmental standards we're building, you'll be aware we've got our own Swansea standard, which we're very proud of because it obviously protects tenants from, the high fuel bills. We're creating very energy efficient homes, which nobody would argue against. We are governed by the standards, to get social housing grant, which makes the schemes more viable. We are governed by those design quality standards and the Welsh WDQR new standard that's come in that does need us to achieve those standards in order to get the grant to make the schemes viable in the first place. We are looking at prefab options. We did some BT passive prefab pods in our Brain House scheme. So we're looking at all those options. But what we found is they're not necessarily any quicker because of the groundworks and all the sort of other stuff that has to be done before those modular buildings are brought in. And they're not always cheaper either. So we are exploring all those sort of innovative ways to increase supply as quickly as we can. But we just can't keep up with the demand really. And yes, lobbying Welsh Government, we are lobbying for more money, for relaxing of standards, everything to try and get those properties through. And the TACP funding, the Transitional Accommodational Capital Programme funding that we've referred to, does have relaxed standards and also allows in some cases us to go ahead with schemes without full planning permission, so we can use permitted development rights to get schemes off the ground quickly and then apply for permanent planning permission at a later date once the schemes have been occupied. So there are a number of ways we can do to try and get schemes off the ground more quickly.
Thank you for translating that acronym for me. Just in terms of social housing grant, do local authorities now access that? It used to be just RSLs.
Yes, local authorities have had access to social housing grant for the last 2 years now.
Right, okay, thank you.
If
Andrew, you
I-
want to come?
Yes, please, if I can come in, particularly on the standard, Chair. Actually, you know, I think it's a bit of a false economy if we start rolling back on the energy efficiency of our properties and the renewable energies. We'll only end up having to go back afterwards in terms of decarbonisation of housing and do that again. And quite frankly, it's the right thing to do to build properties that help people reduce their energy bills. And never have we seen such an important time to do that with cost of energy going through the roof. So I wouldn't see us rolling back on our high standards and our Swansea standard. The last thing we want to do is to build new homes and then a few years later have to go back again and add on these technologies. So better to get it done to start with.
Yeah, that's fine. I do agree with that. I just thought it was worth asking the question just to see, you know, where we were. Wendy Fitzgerald, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I did have a little problem hearing Carol. I think there's something slightly wrong with her microphone. I don't know if anyone else experienced it, but thank you for what you said. I think I picked up most of it. What I am interested in is the fact that we have an overwhelming demand in Swansea for social housing. And I think this has been reflected across Wales. And the Welsh Government, I think, have acknowledged that it is the social housing need that is uppermost, over and above private housing need. Now, what I cannot see is how we can ever afford to build the numbers of houses that we need in terms of social housing. We rely on new housing developments to come up with a percentage, you know, be it 15% or even 20%, or then when things get financially difficult for the developer, suddenly that figure is reduced to 10%. And those are affordable housing, not obviously social housing. So how are we ever going to succeed in building the numbers that we need? I mean, is the Welsh Government going to be funding us and the rest of Wales with more money? I just cannot see how we're going to get out of this situation where there is a desperate shortage of social housing.
I'm sure there's a special award if anyone has the answer to that. Andrew, do you want to come in?
I'll give it a try, Chair. Actually, I think the simple response is that this is going to be a collective response from housing associations, from the council. As far as 106 contributions go, I think that's probably more a matter for the planning committee in terms of understanding the viability site by site. But we will continue to try and get as much social housing and affordable housing and also shared ownerships on our sites across Swansea. And the council have an appetite to do as much as we possibly can. And early next year, we're going out with our list of HRA and general fund sites to seek joint ventures with partners so that we can increase the supply of social and affordable housing across Swansea. So we will continue to do everything that we can, but that's not the only solution. We've mentioned acquisitions, we've mentioned reducing our voids. There are so many other things that we also need to do. But obviously, you know, the supply at the moment isn't meeting the demand. So we do have to try and strive to hit those targets. And again, in Swansea, we're not alone. This is reflected across Wales. And I know the Welsh Government share that ambition as well, which is why that they've committed such significant sums to capital grant funding to enable us to do this.
Yeah. Okay, Wendy. Yeah, I think some of these Section 106 are rented as well. Not all purchased at a lower price as well. So it isn't just we're not just selling the houses in Section 106. Some of them are taken over by housing associations and rented out to people as well. Wendy,
Yes,
do you want to come back?
I was going to say, usually it's a fairly small percentage that are actually taken over by social housing organisations. The others, under the banner of affordable housing, you know, have different functions, shall we say.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll see how that works out. Do I want to talk about bed and breakfast? Obviously, we're very much reliant on bed and breakfast at the moment, particularly given the situation with the huge increase in homelessness presentations. We've all got an ambition to keep children out of bed and breakfast in particular. I know that's not been possible in recent months or years. Are we going to be able to get to the stage again where we'll be able to ensure that children don't end up in bed and breakfast in families at all? Andrea?
I'm sure Stephen or Carol will want to come in as well on this, but of course our ambition is to make sure that wherever possible, we try and keep families out of emergency accommodation, particularly bed and breakfast. It's one of our performance indicators, as you know. But that said, if there isn't available accommodation, it's the only solution available, then we will use it. Because what we don't want to do is see families on the street. So we will continue to try and reduce those numbers, but these are particularly challenging times for all the reasons that we've stated in earlier conversations in this meeting. And so we will continue to try and reduce those numbers and do what we can. And one of those ways is to try and build and acquire more properties suitable to move people into. So we will continue to try and do that.
Okay. Steve, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the graph we've got 2 families at the moment in bed and breakfast. So please don't think we've got hundreds and fifties. We've got 2 families in bed and breakfast, one of which has been for a very short period of time, and the other one has got sort of adult children, which very controversial. So sort of 16, 17, without going into too specific. So sometimes there is a reason, and maybe they couldn't occupy one of our temporary accommodation. So sometimes there are reasons why individuals occupy bed and breakfast. We want that to be 0. We always want that to be 0. But in context, compared to other authorities, we're not. But I don't want to do that. We want to be 0. Simple as that. And so, I meet with my colleagues and we flex our temporary accommodation depending on the time of year. So we'll look at, right, there's a peak now, we need to increase the level of family units at temporary accommodation. The more you do that, though, the more you take out your permanent stock. So there's always a balance about getting the right levels of temporary and permanent. But I think we're probably looking now in the new year of trying to take on a couple more family size units accommodation. You've got to manage it, etc. It's not the right way to go. We want people to be permanent housing, but we've been flexible since the pandemic. We've created more stock, and we need to be again at the moment. But as I say, the RSLs have stepped up to that. We rang them a couple of months ago and said, look, we've got too many families in temp. Straight away, they gave us more houses than they needed to, and so we house directly from temporary. So we are making waves into that, and we're not at critical levels anywhere near that at the moment, but we want to get that to 0, Pete. We want 2 to 0, and hopefully we will next week.
Okay, thanks for that. Francesca, you want to talk about single homeless?
Thank you, Chair. My question, probably Andrea, you mentioned about the single occupier households. I was just wondering, out of interest, because there's a huge percentage, isn't it, that are by themselves. How many single occupier stock do we have, and what's our plan to occupy more properties? Have we got sort of a target to get more properties on board?
Yes, we are looking to expand on our single persons accommodation. That is a major part of our strategy. In terms of numbers, I could see Carol has come off mute. Carol, do you have the exact numbers available?
Yeah, we've got in our stock, we've got at the moment, I think we've got about 1,800 one-bedroom properties. It's about 20% of our stock. In terms of what we're doing to increase that supply, we've acquired an additional 99 properties since 2018. 31 of those are one-bed flats. We've got a potential pipeline acquisition of another 9 one-bedroom flats coming online, hopefully this financial year, and continuing our acquisitions program. So we're looking at the acquisition of one-bed flats constantly to see what's on the market. We're also using that transitional accommodation capital program funding to do conversions of 2 former district offices in Penlan and Eastside. So that'll give us another 10 flats. And also then in terms of the More Homes programme, for every development, we are, say, a development of 20 units. We have between 8 to 10 one-bedroom flats on those sites. So for the next 3 developments that we've got coming online, there'll be 21 bedroom flats across those 3 sites. And then in the total pipeline of new schemes, we've got about 532 units coming online. So, you know, there'll be one-bedroom flats on all those schemes. So we'll be able to work out sort of what percentage we need going forward, and we'll do that on a site-by-site basis.
Okay, do you want to move on to the private rented sector?
No, thank you for that. And I noticed that we mentioned about the private rental sector, and obviously speaking from my experience in Mumbles, that we are seeing a lot of, not a lot of evictions, but a lot of people are seeing that Airbnbs are far more lucrative, particularly during the summer months. I know you mentioned there was a couple of other